Ladies, imagine reaching for your favorite foundation, only to discover that hidden in its silky talc base could be microscopic fibers linked to cancer. In 2026, the beauty world is facing a wake-up call. Independent lab tests, FDA alerts, and decades of investigative reports have highlighted a silent risk lurking in powders many of us have trusted for years. Today, we look at 7 talc-based products you need to avoid. Number 7. MAC Studio Fix Powder Plus Foundation. For decades, MAC Studio Fix Powder Plus Foundation has been a staple in the beauty world, praised for its ability to blur pores, control shine, and deliver full coverage in a single swipe. But like many traditional powder foundations, one of its primary ingredients has long been talc. Talc is incredibly soft. In fact, it sits at level 1 on the Mohs hardness scale, making it the softest mineral known to science. That softness is exactly why cosmetic chemists love it. Finely milled talc creates that silky texture that helps powders spread evenly across skin, absorb oil, and leave behind the smooth, matte finish millions of women expect from a foundation compact. But there's a twist that has shadowed talc for decades. In nature, talc deposits often form alongside asbestos minerals. These minerals develop in the same types of metamorphic rock, which means talc ore can become contaminated if the mining and purification processes aren't extremely controlled. It's a problem that scientists have been documenting since the 1970s, when researchers began testing commercial talc products and occasionally discovered trace asbestos fibers mixed in with cosmetic powders. By the late 2000s, the conversation around talc safety had intensified dramatically. High-profile lawsuits involving talc products, particularly those tied to baby powder, triggered broader investigations into how cosmetic talc is sourced and tested. Regulators, such as the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, began conducting surveys of talc-containing cosmetics to check for asbestos contamination. Although most products tested negative, a handful of contaminated items across the beauty market confirmed what scientists had warned for years. Contamination was possible. That's why foundations like Studio Fix, while not scandal products, represent the traditional talc-based formula model that newer beauty brands are gradually moving away from. Today, many cosmetic companies are experimenting with alternatives like mica, silica, rice powder, and plant-derived starches to achieve the same smoothing and oil-absorbing effects without relying on talc at all. The shift reflects something bigger than a single product. It shows how the entire beauty industry is adapting as consumers become more ingredient aware. And that awareness is powerful, but we're not done exposing the dangers just yet. Let's move on. Number 6. Klairs Children's Makeup and Compact Powders. This next one is about Klairs, the tween and teen accessory mecca, and a disturbing discovery that turned childhood sparkle into a public health warning. Back in 2018, consumer watchdog groups like the U.S. Public Interest Research Group were digging into talc-based makeup sold in stores marketed to children and teens. They sent samples of products, including items from Klairs, to independent labs accredited to test for asbestos. These labs used transmission electron microscopy, the gold standard for identifying microscopic asbestos fibers, and found troubling results. Several talc-based products from Klairs contained tremolite asbestos fibers at measurable levels. Imagine giving your daughter a cute compact for her birthday, and later learning that inside that pretty powder case were asbestos fibers, a known human carcinogen linked to lung cancer and mesothelioma. Despite those findings being shared with both Klairs and the FDA in early 2018, the company initially denied the claims, insisting its products were safe and that their talc was certified asbestos-free. But across the Atlantic, regulators in the Netherlands and the UK independently confirmed the results, compelling European authorities to pull the contaminated makeup off shelves there and offer refunds to customers. Meanwhile, American kids were still walking into malls and picking up the very same products. By March 5, 2019, the dynamic shifted dramatically. The FDA conducted its own tests, done on behalf of the agency by the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration and AMA Analytical Services, and confirmed asbestos fibers in 3 Klairs products. The agency then issued a formal safety alert. They urged consumers to discontinue use immediately. Moving on, Number 5. City Color and Beauty Plus Global Cosmetics. Back in 2019, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, was conducting one of its ongoing surveys of talc-containing cosmetic products. That year, among brands tested, something alarming popped up. Multiple cosmetics made by Beauty Plus Global Inc., distributed under the City Color brand, came back positive for asbestos fibers in lab analysis. The products involved weren't obscure samples from backroom shelves. They were ones most of us have seen in drugstore bins or online carts. Each bore FDA sample identifiers and specific lot numbers tied to confirmed contamination. In early September 2019, the FDA went public with its findings and issued a safety alert urging consumers to stop using these products immediately because asbestos poses a risk when airborne and inhaled. The agency doesn't have the authority to force a recall of cosmetics, but it can make these alerts and rely on companies to act voluntarily. Beauty Plus Global did just that. It voluntarily recalled the 4 City Color products identified in the FDA's testing. These items had been stocked at major retailers including Walmart, Amazon, and eBay, and were distributed in markets across the U.S. and even abroad. But here's the twist. Unlike mega beauty houses that issue wide-ranging public statements and detailed corrective campaigns, City Color's response stayed low profile. There wasn't a big press tour or multi-page safety manifesto, there were just lot-specific recalls and safety notices. That isn't unusual for brands like this. Beauty Plus Global operates largely as a contract manufacturer and distributor, and its products, though widely sold, don't have the same household name recognition as giants like L'Oreal or Revlon. Because of that, mainstream press coverage of the recall and the contamination hasn't been as loud, and many consumers only learned about it if they happened to check lot numbers or read FDA notices. For women and girls who grew up experimenting with palettes, bronzers, and blushes, this was a jolt. We buy these products for self-expression, not expecting them to contain microscopic fibers linked to serious diseases like mesothelioma and lung cancer decades later. And the reality is that asbestos contamination can happen simply because talc and asbestos are mined in the same geological deposits, not because any brand deliberately puts asbestos in makeup, but because cosmetic-grade talc isn't uniformly regulated or rigorously tested. This next one is no good news either. Number 4. Coty Airspun Face Powder. Let's step back to the 1970s when talcum powder was everywhere. It was marketed as a beautifier, a freshener, a symbol of elegance, and frankly, a must-have in every woman's makeup bag. In 1976, researchers at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City conducted a landmark study that sent shockwaves through the cosmetic and public health world. They tested 19 commercial talc products from shelves across America and found that 10 of them, including Coty Airspun face powder, contained asbestos fibers. They were found to be approximately 2% to 20% of the powder composition. Coty's powder was not a minor player. It was one of the products with significant asbestos content, placing it directly in the contaminated group at 8 to 20% in some samples. Imagine that. Something you might have worn on your face every single day in your teens, 20s, or beyond could have been laced with asbestos without you ever knowing. At that time, consumers trusted big brands implicitly. Regulation and testing weren't nearly as rigorous as they are now, and corporate transparency was far from the standard. Though these findings were published in the 1970s and made headlines, they didn't immediately trigger sweeping recalls or brand apologies. Instead, what we see in the historical record is a legacy of awareness without accountability. Coty, for example, did not publicly announce a major removal of contaminated stock or campaign to alert past consumers, not least because regulatory mechanisms for cosmetic safety were weaker and voluntary recalls were not as common. Decades later, the asbestos and talc problem would surface again as regulators and consumer advocacy groups began systematic testing. While the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's recent sampling programs did not report current asbestos in most contemporary talc cosmetics, the historical evidence remains an important piece of the puzzle. Contamination has happened in products that were widely sold and used for years by millions of women. And here's something personal. something that stops you in your tracks. Studies of asbestos fibers literally found them in human lung and lymph tissue of women who had long used contaminated talc products. Coty Airspun itself shifted over the years. Many modern formulations have been reformulated to be talc-free, especially as brand owners and customers alike became more conscious of safety concerns and regulatory changes. Reformulation often involved replacing talc with other minerals like mica or cornstarch to provide a similar silky finish without the same contamination risk. But here's the key takeaway for us. The beauty industry's historical relationship with talc is a reminder that what's on the label isn't always the full story. As consumers, we deserve transparency, accountability, and the peace of mind that what we use on our skin is truly safe. Moving on. Number 3. Avon Bird of Paradise Powder. Back in the mid-20th century, Avon, with its legion of door-to-door Avon ladies, sold an entire lineup of these talc-based powders. Bird of Paradise perfumed dusting powder, Skin So Soft satin powder, Unforgettable perfumed powder, and others like Charisma and Timeless. These were beauty staples in countless homes. But talc in the earth is almost always associated with asbestos, a mineral we know is a confirmed human carcinogen when inhaled. Asbestos was once widely used in construction and manufacturing, but its fibers, tiny, needle-like, and deadly, can also find their way into talc deposits. That means, unless bid with extreme care and testing, talc can be contaminated with asbestos before it ever arrives in a cosmetic formula. For years, Avon publicly maintained what many brands still say today. The talc in their products was cosmetic grade and tested to be asbestos-free, and that their safety evaluations were thorough and compliant with regulations. On their website, Avon asserts that any talc used has undergone rigorous and thorough safety evaluation and is fully compliant with regulatory requirements, emphasizing that cosmetic-grade talc in their products does not contain asbestos. But in the courtroom, a very different narrative emerged. By 2021, Avon was facing nearly 200 talc lawsuits, alleging that decades of use of its talc products, including the very powders most of us remember fondly, had led to asbestos exposure and serious disease. In 2022, a California jury ruled in favor of a mesothelioma plaintiff, awarding her $52.1 million and concluding that Avon knew about the contamination potential and failed to warn consumers. Jurors found that Avon executives had internal awareness that talc could contain asbestos fibers, but did not share that risk with users. Digging even deeper into evidence presented in these cases, internal Avon documents dating back to the early 1970s acknowledged that certain talc sources contained asbestos, some in surprisingly high quantities. A 1971 memo found asbestos, specifically tremolite, a known hazardous form, in some talc lots at up to 12%. Additional memos from 1972 showed talc from various domestic and international sites flagged with asbestos contamination, ranging from more than 1% to as much as 20 to 25% in some samples. In one memo, the company even recommended discontinuing the use of certain talc sources due to contamination. In response to rising legal and scientific pressure, Avon made a pivotal decision in 2020. The company announced it would stop using talc in its U.S. products. That was a big moment for consumers who had loved these products for years. But even today, Avon still uses talc in some products internationally, and the company continues to defend its testing and safety protocols against claims that its talc was contaminated. And the saga hasn't ended quietly. In 2024, Avon's international arm filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, owing in part to the mounting liability from talc powder cancer allegations and the immense debt associated with 386 pending talc lawsuits. Plaintiffs and their attorneys continue to argue that talc exposure from Avon products directly contributed to serious health outcomes. Number 2. Justice Just Shine Shimmer Powder. In March 2019, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration announced that laboratory testing had detected asbestos fibers in Just Shine Shimmer Powder, a glittery face powder marketed to young makeup enthusiasts. The the discovery didn't happen overnight. In 2018, consumer safety advocates and independent laboratories had already begun raising alarms about talc-based cosmetics marketed to children and teens. When the FDA analyzed samples of Justice's shimmer powder using advanced methods such as polarized light microscopy and transmission electron microscopy, the results confirmed what many experts feared. Asbestos contamination was present. The agency quickly issued a public safety alert on March 5, 2019, advising consumers to stop using the product immediately. For many parents and for young girls who loved experimenting with makeup, the news was deeply unsettling. The powder wasn't a niche or obscure item. Justice operated hundreds of retail locations across the United States, and its cosmetics were widely sold in stores and online. Products like the Just Shine Shimmer Powder were often marketed as part of beginner makeup kits aimed at girls in the 6 to 12 age range. The company's response came quickly. Justice announced a voluntary recall of the product, removing it from shelves and advising customers to return or discard the powder. The Justice case also highlighted a troubling gap in the U.S. cosmetic regulatory system. Unlike pharmaceutical products, cosmetics do not require pre-market safety approval by the FDA. Manufacturers are responsible for ensuring their own ingredients are safe, and testing standards can vary widely from company to company. Number 1. Beauty Glazed Gorgeous Me Eyeshadow Tray Palette. It was May 15, 2020, when the Environmental Working Group, a U.S. nonprofit that researches chemical hazards in consumer products, dropped the bombshell. They'd commissioned a team at the Scientific Analytical Institute in Greensboro, North Carolina, to test popular talc-based cosmetics for asbestos contamination as part of a broader investigation into talc safety. What they uncovered shook the beauty community. In the Beauty Glazed Gorgeous Me Eyeshadow Tray Palette, asbestos contamination was measurable and real. Out of the 25 shades tested, 20% contained asbestos fibers, and levels reached as high as 3.5 million asbestos fiber structures per gram of eyeshadow in some shades. That's an astonishing concentration for a product meant to brush onto eyelids and linger close to lungs. The same labs found even higher counts in a different palette tested the same day, up to 3.9 million fibers per gram. The test findings didn't come from regulatory agencies with enforcement power, like the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Rather, they were pushed into the public arena by consumer science advocates because cosmetic safety regulations in the U.S. do not require mandatory pre-market testing of talc for asbestos. That means a palette like this, marketed for adults and young makeup users alike, could be sold openly without any government certification that it's free of toxic contamination. After the EWG disclosed the results, both Amazon and eBay removed the Gorgeous Me palette from their sites. But there is a way out of all of this. Here are some safer picks to consider instead. Many companies have shifted toward talc-free powder foundations that rely on safer mineral or botanical bases. One brand that often comes up in dermatology discussions is Bare Minerals, whose original loose mineral foundation uses a short ingredient list built around zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, and mica instead of talc. The formula first launched in the mid-1990s, long before the recent wave of talc scrutiny, and it remains one of the most widely used mineral foundations in the world today. Mineral-based products like this are popular because they sit lightly on the skin and avoid the mineral sourcing issues associated with talc. Another good option many women gravitate toward is Ilia Beauty's Super Serum Skin Tint, which isn't a powder foundation but still provides sheer coverage while relying on skincare style ingredients rather than traditional cosmetic fillers. Brands like Ilia emerged during the clean beauty boom of the 2000s, when consumers began demanding more transparency about ingredients and supply chains. If you still love the feel of a pressed powder, there are talc-free formulas designed specifically to mimic the texture of traditional foundations. Lawless Beauty's seal the deal. Talc-free setting powder, for example, replaces talc with finely milled mica and silica, which create a similar soft focus effect without relying on mined talc deposits. Silica, in particular, has become a common replacement because it absorbs oil and blurs pores. Two reasons talc was historically used in the first place. Then, there are brands built entirely around talc-free formulations. RMS Beauty, launched by makeup artist Rose-Marie Swift in 2009, was one of the pioneers of this movement. Many RMS complexion products rely on organic oils, mineral pigments, and rice starch to create coverage rather than the talc-heavy bases used in older powder foundations. Rice powder is especially interesting because it has been used in Asian cosmetics for centuries as a natural mattifying agent. Another option that dermatologists frequently mention is Alima Pure Satin Matte Foundation, a mineral powder made primarily from mica, iron oxides, and titanium dioxide. It's designed specifically for people with sensitive skin. What all these alternatives have in common is ingredient transparency. And that's actually the empowering part of this story. As women, we've always been the primary users of cosmetic products. The shift toward talc-free formulas happened because consumers began asking questions. Remember, the pursuit of beauty must never compromise your health.